Hello, my name is Kevin Howard, and I am the host of Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Welcome to episode 22. In this episode, I am setting myself up for some serious criticism. After 21 episodes, Kevin, are you going to start clickbaiting? No, that's not what's happening here on Breadcrumbs. But in this episode, I am directing our conversation to the biggest, most scandalous elephant in the room, the Epstein files. Now, I know this is a minefield, but here's the thing. I want us to take a look at what Epstein reveals, because this is where we will find why this matters to us at all. Now, we understand why it's the talk of the social media. It's the talk of the internet. It's the talk of the establishment media because it has everything that makes a story have legs in this toxic society that we live in. It has complete, scandalous, lurid, illicit, I run out of adjectives, accusations, incidents of ongoing, long term illicit activities. And it involves the elite class, the celebrity class, straight across the class. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about entertainment or royalty or American presidents or foreign leaders or diplomats or academics or intellectuals, technologists, business tycoons, the entire spectrum of the elite class has well known, well respected people who are implicated. And the thing about the implications are, it's not that necessarily all the people who are implicated were engaged in the illicit activity. It was that they knew, that the evidence showed that they knew that this was going on, and that many of them, for years, said nothing, did nothing, and some went as far as to justify it, to rationalize it, to outright deny it, despite all the evidence to the contrary. So we're going to talk about it, but we're not going to talk about it the way it's talked about elsewhere. We're not going to get into any of the salacious details. As you notice, I did not cover them. We're going to talk about how this affects us. So, episode 22 of Breadcrumbs, what Epstein reveals. Now, before we get into the meat of this conversation, I'm going to remind you of something that I do every episode, particularly for this conversation, because this episode is a minefield of trigger points for all of you and certainly for me. And so, the way we're going to approach this conversation is we're going to use our shared experiences and our shared humanity as the wellspring of experiences and information that we're going to rely on to validate how we have this conversation, on what basis we're having this conversation, and whether the information we gain from this conversation resonates in light of our individual lived experiences. And by doing it this way, it creates a safe space because you will understand where I'm coming from and you will understand what I'm appealing to in you, which is through the basis of our shared experience and our shared humanity. Okay. So as I come through this discussion, and I'm just the initiator of the discussion, your role here on Breadcrumbs, as you listen to these subjects, which are often sensitive but important for us to discuss because they affect our lives. What your role is to tap into your lived experiences as I share mine relating to the subject we discuss, and assess whether or not what you hear in this conversation resonates. Does it make sense in light of your experiences? Certainly, you're going to get exposed to new information. That's a part of my responsibility. Why else would you watch or listen? But you will have a lifetime of experience, much of which we have shared, as a baseline for assessing whether it makes sense. And you are empowered, just like I am, to use your chosen AI bot to verify, based on all available information, whether any claim that I make is supportable by the truth. And so it's on this basis that we have these discussions, and it's on this basis that we have a safe space, because what will not be involved is me accusing you of something, me weaponizing something about you that's different from me presenting an argument that is weaponizing the reason why we should be fighting and bickering and arguing. You can get that anywhere else on social media or in our established media. But you're not here on Breadcrumbs because we're just neighbors, no experts, experienced people, experienced in life, experienced humans who are trying to make sense of the things that impact our lives. So, as you hear what I have to say today, put your comments, your constructive comments in the notes. That's really, really important. If I make a mistake and you find a fact that's wrong, put it in the notes. I want to be held accountable. I'm just like you. I'm not trying to be perfect. And if I make a mistake, I will admit I made a mistake. But this tells you that it's an honest mistake. Because unlike what we get through the establishment media, this is not about manufactured consent. This is about making sense of a world in which we are told so much misinformation, our head spins. Not here on Breadcrumbs. So, this is how we are going to have this conversation. This is what makes this conversation safe, but it will also allow this conversation to be informative. So let us begin. What Epstein reveals. The first thing out of the millions of files that are available now is that the sheer breadth of the elite class that's involved. If you have a hero that happens to be an extremely successful celebrity or in the power elite across the spectrum, you probably have a hero who's been implemented by these files. Thing about that is startling is that without getting into the details of what the accusations are, at the heart of this controversy are acts that are so egregious that if any of us happen to know anybody who either engaged in these acts or knew about these acts or facilitated these acts to occur, there's no way you or I would say nothing, would do nothing, or would find a way because we happen to like the person to rationalize it away. But that's not what we found here in these Epstein files. That the members of the elite class who were implicated in this by either engaging in the activity specifically or knowing about the activity and maintaining a relationship with Epstein himself and saying nothing to the authorities, saying nothing to protect the victims, just going about their lives as if this is okay. Okay. This creates a circumstance where how do we possibly, if you had any regard for any of these people who the evidence definitely shows that they knew or participated in this activity and did nothing, How do you maintain any level of respect for them? Because the magnitude of these accusations is so severe, it leaves, in the absence of complete mea culpa on their part, and we are all human, right? That would start the process of us potentially forgiving them, of us potentially, of them becoming redeemable, right? But everyone involved here is still denying that they did anything despite the evidence to the contrary. So that creates a situation where all these people are simply irredeemable by any measure of social standard. Okay, so if that's the case, what do we do now? Why do we care? Well, this leads us to the first breadcrumb. The number one takeaway I have from the range of people involved, and let's put a few names involved. We're talking about like Prince Andrew, British royal. We're talking about presidents from the progressive side and the conservative side. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton. We're talking about tycoons, Bill Gates, Elon Musk. We're talking about one of the owners of the New York Giants, Steve Tisch, the football New York Giants. We're talking about spiritual leaders, you know, like the Dalai Lama and Deepak Chopra. It just, we're talking about entertainers, David Copperfield, the magician. Intellectual, Noam Chomsky, the man who co-wrote Manufactured Consent. Yeah, and Richard Dawkins. All sides. Like I said, this is beyond ideology. This is beyond ethnicity. The interesting thing is, it's virtually beyond gender, though there are notable women who condone this activity, notwithstanding that the victims primarily were women. But my point being is, when you have that kind of range of a particular class of people who either engaged in the most illicit, decadent activities that leave no room for redeem, it makes them completely irredeemable because they still deny it and yet they condone it for as long as they did. The implications of that is the elite class believes that they are above not only the law, because these activities were very illegal and people are being indicted, such as Prince Andrew and others. So they believe that they're above the law. But beyond that, they're above all the basic rules of social decency. Okay. And that's important to take note of that. This is the elite class, right? This is supposed to be the best and the brightest, the most talented, the most gifted, the most successful of our culture, of our countries, of our societies. And to a person, they condone this activity. So, yeah, breadcrumb number one, the elite class hold themselves above the law and above the basic standards, social standards. Full stop. And yet, breadcrumb number two, it's this very class that sets the rules of society, that sets the laws of the society, but they hold themselves above it. So, what does that mean? That means that the rules that they set in place and the laws that they establish with their power and their wealth are designed to control us, not them. So, if that's the case, If these people who consider themselves above the same rules and the same laws that they impose on us, how are we doing? Well, as you know, I have covered this extensively in previous episodes of Breadcrumbs. So I will only just give the bullet points that you already know if you've been watching the show, or certainly if you've lived in the United States over the last some years. We are experiencing the most severe amount of wealth and income inequality in modern history. It's just that simple. These elites represent the wealthiest billionaire class ever. You have members of this elite class who have as much wealth as the whole class of the wealthy elite in different eras, like the Gilded Age. Yeah. All of this accelerated coming out, going through the COVID experience. So let's just go for a few bullet points back in 2020. If you recall, we shut down this economy, all the non-essential aspects of the economy. About 80% of the US economy we shut down and we sheltered in place. Right? And the impact of that activity only made the wealth and income inequality in this country worse. So for the billionaires, their net worth in 2020 went up over $1 trillion. For the wealth and power who own 95% of all shares outstanding on the major securities indexes, yeah, the Dow Industrials in 2020 went up 7.8%. The S&P 500 went up 16%. The Russell 2000, the broad market 2000 went up 18%. The NASDAQ composite went up 43.6%. Yeah. But how did Main Street do when we shut down 80% of the economy? US GDP went down 3.5%. Yeah. The stock market blew up. The billionaires gained $1 trillion in wealth, and Main Street contracted 3.5%. And to put that into some perspective, we haven't had that level of contraction since 1935. It was nearly double the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. Yes, yes, that bad. Okay. But extreme wealth had a banner year. And I've covered this in a previous episode as to how the Federal Reserve helped them to do that. Nonetheless, this question is, how did we do? Okay. If you earned $26,000 a year or less, you lost, that whole class lost 10 million jobs. Yeah, yeah. Check the Federal Reserve on that one. 30% of all small businesses in America closed and did not reopen. Did you hear of any of the major airlines shutting down? Did you hear any of the major hotel chains shutting down? We sheltered in place for much of the year. Hilton's global occupancy was single digits when they used to 80 something percent. Oh yeah. Did you hear of any of them going bankrupt? This is what I'm saying. The large corporations, they did gangbusters. The stock market went through the roof. Okay. This is what happened in just as recent as 2020. But this wealth and income inequality is a 50-year trend that only peaked in 2021 when we came out of COVID. But the Rand Corporation captured the full picture. Because what they did is they did an analysis of the income distribution in America from 1946 to 1975. And they compared that to the income distribution in America from 1976 to 2020. And they determined that the rules and the laws that the elite passed in this country over the last 50 years had redistributed $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of earners in America to the top 1%, to the top 1%, not the top 10%, the top 1%. Okay, $50 trillion. And that if you were to give back pay to every American worker in the bottom 90% of earners, you'd have to give all of them a $600,000 check. Yeah. What that means is that the Americans who lived between 1946 and 1975 earned that much more than the Americans who lived and worked from 1976 to 2020. This is because the rules of that elite class, that same class who views themselves as above the law and above the standards of decency in our society, that elite class established laws and rules that we live by that extracted that much money, that much wealth from us, leaving us in the condition we are in America today. And I've talked about that condition. We are experiencing the worst housing affordability crisis in U.S. history. And how did that happen? The same long-term trend, but coming out of COVID, starting in 2021, everything accelerated. And why? Because the help that the Federal Reserve gave to the large corporations due to the authorizing legislation of the CARES Act passed in March of 2020, the help that the Federal Reserve gave to the large corporations of this country, by the way, to the tune of $4 trillion in financing based on the Federal Reserve's cost of funds. Yeah, the federal funds rate. Yeah. Okay. This is what drove the stock market up when the entire real economy went down. But because these elites own so much of those shares, in fact, four entities own 95% of the market, including BlackRock, State Street. I'll list all four. Don't worry, I'll list all four in the notes. My point being, they were so fat on cash while most of the working people in the country were either losing jobs or losing their businesses. Yeah, right. That they decided to buy housing, residential housing. And in 2021, 1 in 4 houses purchased in America was from an institutional investor. Yeah, hedge fund, some institutional investor who was buying up houses in order to hold them and rent them. And this created an 18% spike in the median value of a home in 2021 alone. The typical national appreciation is 5%. Yeah, 18% in 2021 alone. And what this did was accelerate the appreciation of homes that priced out the American middle class. So by January of 2025, you had a 30% increase in the value of the median home in America. It went from $340,000 to $440,000. It has since come down to $405,000 in January 2026. I've talked about that, and we'll talk about that maybe, if I get around to it. But here's the thing. Even at that price, when you combine the fact that the 30-year fixed rate mortgage doubled from 2.9% to 6.1%, the combination of the cost of money doubling and the price of the house going up 30% was that the median income of the middle class can no longer afford to buy a home, the median home, in the average American city for the first time in US history. And the impact that is having is that it is driving rent inflation. Yeah. So rent inflation since 2021 has kind of matched housing inflation by 30%. And what that is doing to the lower income families, specifically households who earn up to 200% of the federal poverty level. Now, to put a number to that, for a family of three, 200% of the federal poverty level is like $55,000. So, yeah, to give some perspective to that number, the highest number of American households earn between $50 and $55,000 a year. Yeah. So, for people who earn up to 200% of the federal poverty level, the Urban Institute's recent study indicates that 52% of those households report food insecurity. So, institutional investors run up the price of housing by being a new buyer, buying cash, runs up the price of housing, creates the inflationary bubble in 2022 that peaked at 9.1%. Long-term interest rates follow suit and the 30-year fixed rate mortgage doubles. And now the middle class household who used to be able to afford to buy a house coming into COVID can no longer afford to buy a house. And because they make house buying, what used to be house buying money, the landlords, those institutional investors, raise the rents to capture that too. And that forces the lower income families to make a truly Hobson's choice. Do I pay the rent or do I eat less? And what they have proven, according to the Urban Institute, is that they would rather have shelter and eat less. So this is how we're doing. This is where we are based on the rules and the laws established by this elite class. So that leads us to breadcrumb number 3. The real divide in America is between the elite class and everybody else. If you're in the bottom 99% of this country, you're on one side of the ledger, and the 1% and above is on the other side of the ledger. And let me give you one devastating data point to prove it. When you look at life expectancy by income in America, and I go into your AI bot and ask to verify what I'm about to tell you, because I'm going to put the data in the notes that you see when I went into my AI bot. But it's startling. If you look at the life expectancy by income in the United States, and it breaks it down from the bottom 1% of earners, and then it has different ranges all the way up to the top 1%. Okay. For every income level, from the lower level to the upper level, you literally live longer. All the way through. There's never a case where people who earn a little bit more money don't live longer than people who earn a little bit less. Yeah, so it's consistent all the way around. But the biggest gap, the biggest leap in life expectancy in this of all the levels is between the top 5% and the top 1%. So for all you people up on the top of the hill who's not on billionaire row, I'm talking to you. Literally, for men, the men in the top 1% live about 3 years longer. Yeah. And the women live about a year longer. Yeah. Think about that. So the real demarcation, the real dividing line in America is not red versus blue, MAGA versus the progressives, Democrats versus Republicans, the South versus the North, the Cowboys versus the Redskins. No. Or what do they call them these days? See, I get myself into trouble. Those are not the dividing lines, the real dividing lines in this country that impact our life more than anything else, as the life expectancy data shows, is the elite on one side of the ledger, top 1%, and the 99% on the other top side of the ledger. Think about it. So that leads us to breadcrumb number 4. The root cause of what is making our lives unbearable is the insatiable greed of the elite. That same elite who holds themselves above the rules, who finds their names throughout the Epstein files, who have absolutely no redeemable virtue for being able to engage in the kind of activities that are substantiated in those files, and to know about it, to justify it, to not say anything, to go on as if it's okay, to maintain quality relationships over protracted periods of time. Yeah, that elite class, yeah. It is their unsatiable greed that makes our lives unbearable. They are the reason why we have this wealth and income inequality in this country to the severest extent that did not exist from 1946 to 1975. So it was not like it was always this way. No, it's gotten materially worse because the elite of this country made a decision. And that decision was shared prosperity is too expensive. Because when the working class in this country used to be able to afford to buy a house, yeah, sounds crazy today, but they used to be. Remember, All in the Family, Norman Lear, Archie Bunker, yes, Hollywood mimicking the actual society. That wasn't a fantasy. That was just a regular working class family, Archie Bunker living in Queens, New York, non-college educated, unionized longshoremen working on the dock, unloading and loading the boats, the ships. Yeah, he used to be able to afford to own a house in New York City, Queens, New York, and send his daughter Gloria to college. Yeah, when the working class of this country could access the American dream, we had an American people who could hold power accountable. We had the civil rights movement. We had the equal rights movement. We had the anti-war movement. We had a working class press. Even the elite of the press were middle class. Walter Cronkite never earned six figures. Okay, right? They brought down a sitting president. They ended the Vietnam War, right? Because of their advocacy. Yeah, that was when the American public had the ability to access the American dream, had the ability to take regular vacations and pay for their kids' college education. Yeah, all those things. Yeah, but that held power to account. And so they made a different choice. They decided, oh no, we can't control the narrative. We can't make the money the way we like to make the money if they make enough money to where they have the time to validate and check and verify and hold us to account. So we got to break the back of this shared prosperity that came out of World War II and the New Deal. We got to break the back of that. And that's what they did over the last 50 years. And that's what the Rand Corporation's $50 trillion demonstrates, because that's how badly they did it. And now, not only can't the working class has food insecurity. The middle class can't afford to buy a home for the first time in history. That's how bad and it is for us and how successful they have been. And look at them. They have so much money that they spend it on the most depraved things like cue me up for Epstein Island. I mean, think about that. While we are having the hardest time just keeping both nostrils over the waterline, while the 116 million Americans who live in households who earn 200% of the federal poverty level, 52% of them are reporting food insecurity. And these wealthy elites have enough. Like Bezos has enough to spend 10, $12 billion to emulate what NASA did 60 years ago, space flight in the upper atmosphere, and then have the audacity to come down and do a press conference and thank the employees at Amazon that he's paying $15 an hour who piss in a cup and get fired by text message. Yeah, that's the elites. That's what the elites think of us. So, yeah, the root cause of what is making our lives unbearable is the insatiable greed of the wealthy elite. So, what can we do? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, but it's really hard because they've done a hell of a job getting us to fight like cats and dogs. But breadcrumb number 5 is we must stop fighting amongst ourselves and come together for the good of all of us. And when I mean all of us, I'm talking about the 99%. Yes. So if you are a millionaire, I'm talking to you. Yeah, we have to come together because, as I mentioned in the life expectancy data, the millionaires live about 3 years shorter than the billionaires. You're not in their party. Okay, I'm just saying. The data shows that. Okay, so we must stop fighting amongst ourselves and come together for the good of all of us. It's obvious when you see me on the screen, and if you're listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, I am a black man in America. And I'm here to tell you whatever the historical argument that a person of color might have with white people in the United States, given our history, those impacts in a modern context pale by comparison to what extreme wealth is doing to me and all of us because of this wealth and income inequality, because of this insatiable greed. That is what's smothering my ability to take care of myself and my family without working crazy hours and making what I used to make back in the day. Does that sound familiar to you? Yeah. So, yeah, we need to stop fighting amongst ourselves and come together for the good of all of us. We produce the bottom 99%, we produce every good and service that this economy and this country produces. And despite the fact that we produce all those goods and services, money is increasingly becoming scarce. And once again, I'm talking about from the millionaires down, because when they look for investments, the opportunities seem very shaky. Okay, that's their kind of problem. But for everyone else who don't have the resource to invest, January had the highest number of layoffs in the United States since the Great Recession. People are losing jobs. Technology is replacing jobs. Art AI is replacing jobs. Money is getting scarce for a lot of us. This is not by accident. What is happening here is that insatiable greed, that forever Kirby vacuum cleaner on the US economy that is in the hands of extreme wealth is draining more and more and more of the income that our productivity produces. leaving less and less for all of us. Okay, so this leads us to breadcrumb number 3. The only control the elite class has on us is the money, and they're exercising that control. They're tightening the noose. They're putting the knee on the neck of the American middle class, the American lower income working class, right? They're putting the knee on our neck. Yeah, I'm using that analogy because they are draining more and more of the resources we need. And now food insecurity is a major problem in the United States. Yeah. So, since we produce all the goods and services that this economy produces, we do the work. We have the skills. Okay. We have to be open to finding a way to produce the goods and services that we need to take care of us, even if money gets tight. Because if we don't, then we will be forced to do whatever the elites want us to do. We either starve or we find a way to work around it. But I suggest we find a way to work around it. This is the path to us regaining our sovereignty, to us regaining our agency, to us regaining our democracy. The 99%. We need to come together and form a new governing coalition. Yes, MAGA and progressives, North and South, East and West, gay and straight, trans and whatever. All of it needs to come together. If you're in the 99%, we need to form a defining governing coalition that is sober in looking at who is the cause of our American nightmare. It is not who we have been encouraged to hate. It is not. I'm black middle class. It is not the white working class. It is not the white middle class that's the cause of my problems. It is the extreme wealth, that elite that has many black faces like Obama, like Oprah Winfrey, and on and such. Yeah, this is not. The only dividing line is that 1% and the 99%, because it's that 1% who made all these rules. Yeah, is that 1% who defined the laws. It's that 1% who finds their names all over the Epstein files, which indicate that they do not hold themselves bound by the same rules and the same laws that they hold us to. So we got to find a way, understanding that that's the fight that we're in, understanding that now after 50, 60 years of slowly draining our wealth and income, we're at a point where the water is bubbling and our eyes are bulging and we're at each other's throats because we don't know how we're going to make it through. Well, we have to stop blaming other people who've been lied to also, other people who have the same stress that you have. And we need to turn our attention on the people who are causing this problem. And I'm not talking about the pitchforks. No, because this still isn't a democracy. If the 99% came together, we can reclaim the sovereignty of the United States to the American people. We could take it back out of the hands of the elite. All we got to do is come together. Stop fighting against each other for reasons that are not the reasons why we find ourselves in this place. Okay. What Epstein reveals is that we are in a truly pathological struggle against an elite class who do not hold themselves bound by the same social norms, by the same rules of society, by the laws that govern us. And that they who write those laws and who write those rules have done so to our severe detriment. And that we can't change those rules and those laws unless we come together and reclaim our government and pass legislation and establish rules and taxation that serve all of us. This is Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode. I really invite you to put your comments in the notes. Make them constructive. This is important stuff. Why should we care about the Epstein files? Because it shows us who our enemy is. And whoever your hero was, left, right, center, they're probably in there if they're in the elite class. And that tells you it's us against them. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time in the conversation.